It was just past midnight when she finally made the decision. For hours she had sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the small clock on the wall. Each second felt like a drop of water echoing in a dark room. The house was quiet, except for the soft hum of the ceiling fan and the faint barking of dogs somewhere outside. Her heart was beating so loudly it felt like someone could hear it. But there was no one. Not anymore. She rose slowly, careful not to make any noise. Every step she took across the cold floor felt like walking through memories she wanted to forget. On the dresser lay a photo frame of their wedding day. 2 smiling faces frozen in time, a lie she had lived with for years. She turned it face down and whispered to herself, "Enough." In the corner of the room, a small suitcase waited. She had packed it earlier that day when he was at work. Only the essentials. A few clothes, some money she had secretly saved, her ID, and a small notebook filled with thoughts she never dared to say out loud. She picked it up, feeling its weight in her hand. Freedom was heavy, she realized. She left her wedding ring on the nightstand. The gold had lost its shine long ago. It used to mean forever, but now it only reminded her of the cage she was trapped in. She took a deep breath, opened the front door, and stepped out into the cold night air. For a moment, she thought she heard a sound from the bedroom, a faint rustle. Her heart jumped, but then silence returned. Maybe it was just her fear trying to hold her back one last time. The street was empty. The streetlights flickered like weak candles, and the air smelled of rain. She walked fast, clutching her bag close to her chest. Every sound, every shadow made her nervous. But she didn't stop. She couldn't. By the time she reached the bus station, the early morning chill had crept under her skin. She bought a ticket to the airport without thinking twice. She didn't care where she went, only that it was far away from here. When the bus finally arrived, she sat near the window and stared outside. As the city lights faded behind her, tears rolled down her cheeks. Not because she was sad, but because she was finally free enough to cry. At the airport, people hurried past her with suitcases and smiles. To them, travel meant vacations and business trips. For her, it meant survival. She walked up to the ticket counter and asked for the first available flight out. The woman behind the counter looked at her curiously but didn't ask questions. She handed her a ticket, and that was it. The waiting area was cold. She sat quietly, hugging her bag. Her mind was a storm of thoughts. What if he woke up and realized she was gone? What if he tried to find her? She didn't know what the future held. All she knew was that she couldn't go back. When her flight was called, she rushed to the gate, her heart racing with both fear and relief. The line was long, and the loudspeakers echoed flight numbers she barely understood. She handed over her ticket, barely looking at it, and stepped onto the jet bridge. Inside the plane, she found her seat by the window. The world outside was dark, and the runway lights looked like distant stars. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Please let this be the right choice." She didn't know then that it wasn't the right plane at all. Minutes later, a voice interrupted her thoughts. "Excuse me, I think that's my seat." She looked up and saw a man standing in the aisle holding a boarding pass. His tone wasn't rude, just calm and polite. She glanced at her own ticket and realized she was sitting in the wrong row. Embarrassed, she apologized quickly and moved to the next seat over. The man gave her a small nod and sat down beside her. As the plane began to fill, she tried to focus on anything but her thoughts. The air smelled faintly of coffee and new fabric. The flight attendants moved briskly, checking belts and bags. When the plane finally began to move, she gripped the armrest tightly. It was her first time flying alone. The man beside her noticed. "First flight?" he asked with a small smile. She hesitated before nodding. "Something like that." He chuckled softly but didn't push for more conversation. For the first hour, they sat in silence. She watched the clouds pass below and thought about all the years she had lost. The laughter that had turned into shouting. The love that became fear. She promised herself she would never live like that again. Halfway through the flight, turbulence hit. The plane shook and passengers gasped. Her hand clutched the armrest tighter. The man beside her leaned slightly toward her and said quietly, "It's all right. Just some rough air. Nothing to worry about." His calm tone helped. She nodded, forcing a small smile. When the turbulence passed, she let out a shaky breath. He looked at her again, this time with concern. "You're running from something, aren't you?" His words startled her. She froze for a moment, unsure how to respond. Then she said softly, "Something like that." He didn't ask more. Instead, he said, Sometimes the wrong road leads you exactly where you need to go. She looked at him, puzzled by the words. But something about his voice felt comforting, almost familiar in a strange way. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to relax a little. They spoke again a while later. Nothing deep, just simple things. Where he was headed, how long he had been traveling, small stories about the places he'd seen. He was kind but mysterious. Every time she asked something about him, his answers were brief, as if he was used to hiding his own story. When the plane began to descend, the captain's voice came over the speakers announcing the landing city. That was the moment she realized something was wrong. The name wasn't the one on her ticket. She frowned and looked at her boarding pass again. Her heart skipped. It wasn't her flight. She had boarded the wrong plane. Panic rushed through her. She looked around as if there might still be time to fix it, but of course there wasn't. She covered her mouth with her hand, half laughing, half crying. The man beside her noticed her reaction. "What's wrong?" he asked. I took the wrong flight," she whispered. He looked surprised, then smiled faintly. "Well, maybe it's not a mistake." When they landed, she felt too embarrassed to move. Everyone else stood up, pulling down bags, stretching, chatting about their plans. She stayed seated, unsure what to do. The man noticed her hesitation again. "Do you need help?" She nodded weakly. "I don't even know where I am." He chuckled gently. "You're in Clearwater Bay. It's a small coastal town. Not a bad place to end up." She managed a small smile, though her mind was spinning. He helped her with her luggage, and they walked out together. The air outside smelled of salt and sea breeze. It was early morning now, and the sun was just beginning to rise. She had no plan, no place to go, but somehow she didn't feel completely lost. At the taxi stand, she thanked him for his kindness. Before getting into his own car, he reached into his jacket and handed her a small card. "In case you need a friend while you figure things out," he said. She looked down at it. There was just a name and a number. No title, no company. Simple yet strangely personal. She wanted to ask more about him, but he was already walking away. She stood there, watching him disappear into the misty morning. Around her, people rushed past with suitcases and coffee cups, all with places to be. She had nowhere, yet everywhere to go. She climbed into a taxi and told the driver to take her anywhere near the ocean. As they drove along the coast, she rolled down the window. The wind blew through her hair, carrying away the last bits of fear that clung to her. She didn't know what the future would bring, but for the first time in years, she felt a small flicker of hope. She looked at the card again, tracing the name with her finger. Maybe, she thought, taking the wrong plane wasn't a mistake at all. Maybe it was the universe giving her a second chance. As the taxi turned toward the rising sun, she smiled softly. For the first time, she wasn't running away. She was running toward something new, something unknown yet peaceful. And somewhere deep inside, she knew this was just the beginning of her real story. The taxi stopped near a small inn by the water. The sun had already risen, turning the ocean into a mirror of gold and silver. She stepped out, breathing in the salty air. It was quiet here, nothing like the city she'd left behind. Waves hit the shore gently, and a few fishermen stood by their boats talking softly. For the first time in years, silence didn't scare her. It felt like healing. The inn was old but clean. The woman at the counter gave her a kind smile when she asked for a room. "You're lucky," the lady said. "Last one just opened up this morning." It felt like another small sign from the universe telling her she was where she needed to be. The room was small but cozy, with a window overlooking the sea. She set her bag down and sank onto the bed. For a while she just sat there staring out at the horizon. The sound of waves calmed her restless thoughts. Then exhaustion took over. She hadn't really slept in 2 days. She curled up on the bed and drifted off, the sea breeze carrying her into a deep, dreamless sleep. When she woke, it was late afternoon. The light outside had turned soft and orange. She washed her face, brushed her hair, and went out for a walk. The streets were narrow, lined with little shops and cafes. People smiled at her as they passed. It felt strange, being somewhere no one knew her name, where no one whispered or judged. She stopped by a small cafe by the harbor and ordered a cup of tea. As she waited, she heard a voice she recognized. Turning around, she saw him, the man from the plane. He was standing by the counter, speaking with the waiter. For a moment, she froze. Of all the places she could have ended up, how was he here too? He turned and saw her. A smile spread across his face, gentle and surprised at the same time. "Looks like the world's smaller than we think," he said, walking over. She couldn't help but laugh a little. "I guess it is." He asked if he could sit, and she nodded. They talked for a while about the town, about how beautiful it was. She told him she'd found a room near the beach. He said he was there for a few days on business. Something about meeting an old friend who owned a fishing company. He didn't go into detail, and she didn't ask. When she mentioned that she had no plan yet, he suggested she take her time. "This place has a way of helping people figure out what they want," he said. "Maybe that's why you ended up here." They watched the sunset together from the cafe window. The sky turned deep shades of pink and purple, and for a moment everything felt still. She didn't realize how long they'd been talking until the streetlights flickered on outside. Before leaving, he offered to show her around the next day, just a few local spots if she wanted. She hesitated at first, still unsure about trusting strangers, but something about him felt safe. There was no pressure in his tone, no hidden agenda, just simple kindness, so she said yes. The next morning he was waiting outside the cafe with 2 cups of coffee. "I figured you'd need one," he said with a grin. She took it, smiling back. They walked together through the quiet town, past small markets where people sold fresh bread and fruit. He seemed to know everyone. People waved at him, called out his name. "Seems like you're well known here," she said. He shrugged. "I come here a lot. This place helped me once too." That made her curious, but he didn't explain and she didn't push. They spent the day exploring hidden parts of the coast, the cliffs where the sea met the rocks, an old lighthouse that hadn't worked in years, and a narrow trail that led to a small hill overlooking the entire bay. The wind was strong there, blowing through their hair, carrying the smell of salt and sun. Standing on that hill, she felt lighter than she had in years. He looked at her and said quietly, "You've got that look." "What look?" she asked. "The one people get when they realize they're finally free." She didn't reply, but his words stayed with her long after that day. In the following weeks, life settled into a gentle rhythm. She found a small job at the cafe where they'd first met. The owner liked her honesty and soft nature. The work was simple, serving coffee, cleaning tables, greeting tourists, but it gave her purpose. She started saving money again, this time not for escape but for living. Sometimes he would drop by, sit at the counter, and wait until her shift ended. They'd walk along the beach, talk about small things, books, dreams, what they would do if life gave them another chance. He never asked too much about her past, though she could tell he knew she had been through something painful. Instead, he focused on the present, making her laugh when she least expected it. She started to notice things about him too. He carried himself with quiet strength. There were moments when he'd fall silent, eyes fixed on the distance as if remembering something heavy. Once, when they were walking near the pier, a child dropped a metal toy and the loud clatter made him flinch. She noticed the faint scar on his arm, a thin line that looked old but deep. When she asked, he just said, "A long time ago," and changed the subject. There was mystery in him, but it didn't scare her. Instead, it made her wonder what stories he carried. One evening, they sat on the sand watching the moon rise. The waves shimmered under the pale light. She turned to him and asked softly, "Do you ever wish you could forget the past?" He thought for a moment before answering. "No," he said. "I just wish I'd learned sooner what mattered most." "What's that?" she asked. "To leave when something breaks you. To walk away before you lose yourself." Her eyes filled with tears. He looked at her, realizing what his words meant to her, and added gently, "You did the right thing." That night back in her room, she lay awake, thinking about his words. She had spent so long believing she was weak for leaving, but maybe, she thought, walking away was the bravest thing she'd ever done. As days passed, she began to rebuild her life in small but steady ways. She decorated her little room with flowers from the market. She started sketching again, something she hadn't done in years. Each morning, she'd sit by the window, drink her tea, and write in her old notebook. Not about fear or pain, but about hope and freedom. And he was always around somehow. Sometimes just to say hello, sometimes to share lunch, and sometimes to walk in silence by her side. She didn't know what he did when he wasn't with her, but she never asked. It was enough that he was there when she needed a friend. One day, the cafe owner asked if she'd like to help run a new branch opening near the lighthouse. It was a big offer, one that meant she could finally stand on her own. She accepted without hesitation. When she told him the news, he smiled proudly. "See," he said, "you're already building something new." That evening, they celebrated at the beach. The sky was full of stars, and someone nearby was playing a guitar. She looked at him and said softly, "You know, if I hadn't taken the wrong flight, I wouldn't be here." He laughed quietly. Life's funny that way. Sometimes the wrong turn takes us to the right place. She smiled, and for the first time she believed it. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that he was keeping a secret. One afternoon, while closing the cafe, she saw him standing by the pier, talking to a man in uniform. They seemed serious. When she approached, the man nodded and walked away. She asked him about it later, but he only said, "Just old work stuff." His tone was kind but distant. She decided not to push, though her curiosity grew stronger. That night, as she watched the waves crash under the moonlight, she thought about everything that had happened. The flight, the town, the stranger who'd become her friend. Maybe she didn't know his whole story yet, but she trusted that someday when the time was right, he would tell her. For now, it was enough that he had helped her remember how it felt to live without fear. And as the wind brushed against her face, she realized something simple yet powerful. Freedom wasn't just about leaving the past behind. It was about learning to open her heart again, even after it had been broken, and somewhere, in the quiet space between the sound of waves and the rhythm of her breath, she knew her life was slowly beginning again. The days in the coastal town began to blend into a peaceful rhythm. Morning light would pour through her window, and the smell of the ocean would drift in with the wind. She'd walk barefoot to the cafe, open the shutters, and let the sound of waves fill the small space before customers arrived. Life had become simple, quiet but not lonely. For the first time, she didn't wake up afraid. She often saw him around town. Sometimes he'd be sitting by the harbor, reading a newspaper. Other times he'd stop by the cafe with a soft smile, pretending to be just another customer, though everyone could tell he came for her. The locals noticed, of course. It was a small town, everyone noticed everything. One morning, the cafe owner teased her. "Your friend is here again," she said, nodding toward the window. She looked outside and saw him leaning against the railing, holding 2 coffees. When their eyes met, he lifted 1 cup in greeting. She couldn't help but smile. They spent that morning walking along the beach, their footsteps leaving trails in the wet sand. He asked about her new work at the Lighthouse Cafe and how she liked managing the place. She told him it felt like a dream, busy, sometimes tiring, but fulfilling. "I didn't think I could ever build something again," she admitted. "But here I am," he smiled quietly. "You're stronger than you think." She looked at him, wanting to say thank you, but words felt too small. The way he said things, calm, steady, without pity, made her believe them. Over the next few weeks, their friendship deepened in quiet ways. They shared meals, laughter, and even silence comfortably. Sometimes they'd sit by the rocks watching the sunset, saying nothing at all. It wasn't the kind of silence that felt awkward. It was peaceful, like 2 souls resting after long journeys. But there was something about him she couldn't quite understand. He never talked much about himself. When she asked, he always turned the conversation back to her. Once she gently teased him, "You know so much about me, but I barely know anything about you." He chuckled softly. Maybe there's not much to know, but she didn't believe that. There was a weight behind his eyes, something unspoken. She saw it when he thought no one was watching, the way he stared out to sea, lost in thoughts that seemed to belong to another life. One afternoon, she decided to close the cafe early and walk to the market. The streets were alive with voices and music. As she passed by a flower stall, she heard someone calling her name. Turning around, she saw him coming down the street, waving slightly. He looked different that day, more serious, dressed neatly as if he'd been in a meeting. "Busy day?" she asked. "Yeah," he said, glancing at the sea behind her. "But I needed a break." They walked together through the market, stopping by the food stalls and small vendors. He bought her roasted corn, and they shared it while sitting on a bench near the water. She noticed he was quieter than usual. "Something on your mind?" she asked softly. He hesitated before replying. "Just things from the past. I used to work in a job that made me see too many broken people. Sometimes it still follows me." She looked at him carefully. "What kind of job?" He gave a faint smile. "The kind that helps people find their way out when they're lost." but it doesn't always end the way you hope." She sensed that was all he wanted to say, so she didn't press further. Instead, she said, "Maybe helping people is what you were meant to do." He looked at her with a small nod. "Maybe. Or maybe I was just trying to fix others because I couldn't fix myself." Those words stayed with her long after he walked her home that evening. Behind his calmness there was pain, a quiet sadness that matched her own. One night there was a storm. The wind howled through the narrow streets and rain hit the windows like small stones. She sat by the window of her small room, watching lightning flash over the dark water. Then a knock came at her door. When she opened it, he stood there drenched and breathless. "The power's out by the docks," he said. "Thought I'd check if you were all right." She smiled faintly. "You didn't have to come all the way here in this weather." He shrugged. "Didn't want you sitting in the dark alone." They lit a few candles and sat by the window listening to the rain. The flickering light made the room feel warm despite the storm outside. After a while, he told her stories about the places he'd seen, people he'd met. Not details, just moments. A woman in a small village who made the best bread he'd ever tasted. A boy who once helped him fix a broken motorbike. Bits of life scattered like pieces of a puzzle. Then he fell silent, staring at the candle flame. "You know," he said quietly, "sometimes we meet people at the exact moment we need them. Not before, not after, just when our hearts are ready to see them." She didn't say anything, but her chest felt tight. She wondered if he meant her, or someone else he once knew. When the storm finally passed, he stood to leave. At the door, he turned and said, "If you ever feel like running again, just remember you already made it out once. You can do it again." After he left, she stood there for a long time, staring at the door, feeling something she hadn't felt in years: safety. The next few days were quiet. He didn't come by the cafe like usual. She tried to focus on work, but worry crept in. One evening, she decided to walk to the docks to see if he was there. The sun was setting and the sky glowed orange. She found him sitting by the water, deep in thought. When she approached, he looked up, surprised but not unhappy to see her. "Thought you forgot about this place," she said. "Never," he replied softly. They sat together, watching the waves. After a while, she asked, "Do you ever miss the people you used to help?" "All the time," he said. "But I learned that you can't save everyone. Some people have to find their own way out, like you did." She turned to him. "You helped me too, you know. More than you think." He smiled, that quiet, meaningful smile that always seemed to hide something. "Maybe we helped each other." As the sun dipped below the horizon, she felt a strange sense of calm. Maybe it didn't matter who saved who. What mattered was that both of them had found something worth holding on to. A connection born not out of need but understanding. Weeks turned into months. The cafe flourished, and she became known in the town for her kindness and steady nature. People trusted her, and she began to feel like she belonged. Sometimes she still thought about her past, but it no longer controlled her. He remained a part of her life, steady as the tides. There were still things he didn't talk about. Secrets he carried like silent shadows. But she didn't need to know everything. She had learned that some stories are better told in their own time. One evening, while cleaning up the cafe, she found a small envelope on the counter with her name written in neat handwriting. Inside was a photograph, an old black and white picture of the town from decades ago. On the back it said, "Sometimes the place we escape to is exactly where we were meant to arrive." She smiled softly, realizing it was from him. Later that night, she found him sitting by the beach as usual. She showed him the photo. "You really believe that?" she asked. He nodded. "I do, because I've seen it happen." She looked out at the sea, then back at him. "So have I." The air was cool and the sky filled with stars. In that quiet moment, she understood something deeper, that life wasn't about forgetting what broke you, but about finding people who remind you that you can heal. And though she didn't know what tomorrow would bring, she felt certain about one thing: she was exactly where she needed to be. The morning started like any other. The sea was calm. The cafe smelled of fresh bread, and the small town moved at its slow, peaceful rhythm. She was arranging flowers on the tables, humming softly, when the bell above the door rang. She looked up, expecting to see a regular customer, but the man standing there wasn't a local. He was dressed sharply with dark eyes that seemed to scan every corner of the room. His gaze landed on her, and she froze for a second. There was something about him, something familiar, something she didn't like. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice steady but cautious. He smiled politely. I'm looking for someone. A woman who came here a few months ago. I was told she might work around this area. Her hands tightened around the flower stems. A lot of people come here, she said carefully. It's a tourist town. The man nodded, still studying her. Yes, I can see that. If you happen to see anyone that looks out of place, let me know. He placed a business card on the counter and walked out. The moment the door closed, her heart began to race. She didn't need to read the name on the card to know who had sent him. It was him, her husband. Somehow he had found her trail. She stood there for a long time, staring at the door, her mind spinning. She had been so careful. New number, new address, no social media. How did he find her? By evening, the calm she had built began to crumble. Every sound outside made her jump. She closed the cafe early and walked quickly back to her small room by the shore. The once comforting sound of the waves now made her uneasy. She locked the door, drew the curtains, and sat on the edge of her bed. Her hands trembled as she picked up the small card the stranger had left. The logo was a private security firm, one her husband had mentioned years ago. He used to boast about knowing people who could find anyone. The fear she thought she had buried rose again. It was the same fear that used to keep her silent at home. The fear of being found, of being dragged back into that old, suffocating life. For a moment, she wanted to pack her bag and run again. But where? How many times could she start over? Then a thought came to her, him. The man who had once said she'd already made it out once and could do it again. The one person who had been there from the moment she escaped. Without thinking, she reached for the small card he had given her months ago, the one with just his name and number. Her fingers trembled as she dialed. He picked up on the second ring. Hey! His voice came, calm and steady as always. You all right? She swallowed hard. Someone was here today, asking about me. There was silence on the line, then his voice dropped lower. What did he say? She explained everything, the stranger, the card, the way he looked at her. When she finished, she heard him take a deep breath. Lock your doors and don't go anywhere tonight, he said firmly. I'm on my way. Less than 20 minutes later, she heard a knock on her door. Her heart jumped, but when she looked through the small peephole, it was him. She opened it quickly. He stepped inside, his expression serious but calm. You did the right thing calling me, he said. He took the card from her hand, studied it, then slipped it into his pocket. This isn't random. He was sent, she nodded, her throat tight. He found me. He actually found me. He met her eyes. He might have, but that doesn't mean he can touch you. Not this time. He pulled out his phone and made a few calls she didn't understand, speaking quietly but with authority. Then he looked around her room, checking the windows and locks. It was only then she noticed something. How practiced he seemed. Every move was precise, like someone used to protecting people. Who are you, really? She asked softly. He hesitated, then sat down across from her. I used to be a private investigator. I worked with women who needed to disappear, people escaping bad situations. That's why I was on that flight the night we met. I was helping someone else get to safety. She stared at him, stunned. So you knew? You knew I was running. He nodded slowly. Not everything, but I recognized the look. I've seen it before, the truth sank in. All the calmness, the way he always seemed to know what to say. It all made sense now. She sat back, her hands shaking. I can't go through this again. I can't run forever, he leaned forward. You won't have to. You've already built a life here. You have people who care about you. You're not alone anymore. The weight of those words made her eyes fill with tears. For years she had been alone, relying only on herself. The idea that someone might actually stand beside her felt almost unreal. He stayed that night, sitting by the door while she tried to rest. Every time she stirred, she could see him there, awake, alert, making sure she was safe. By morning, he had a plan. I have contacts in the city, he said. We can get a restraining order and make it official. If your husband tries anything, the police will handle it. But she hesitated. What if he doesn't stop? He looked at her seriously. Then he'll find out he can't intimidate you anymore. You're not the same person he left behind. Later that day, they went to the nearest police station. She gave her statement, trembling but determined. The officer took her details and promised to notify the Coastal Patrol. It wasn't much, but it was something. When they walked out, she felt lighter, still afraid but stronger too. For the first time, she wasn't running. She was standing her ground. Days passed without incident. The stranger didn't return, and the town returned to its usual calm. Still, he stayed close, checking in, walking her home, making sure she wasn't alone at night. She tried to go back to normal, working at the cafe, smiling for the customers. But the tension lingered like a shadow. One evening, as she closed the cafe, she noticed a black car parked across the street. The same one she had seen 2 days before. Her chest tightened. She locked the door and stepped outside, her heart pounding. But before she could decide what to do, he appeared from the corner. "I saw it too," he said quietly. "Get inside." They went back to her room and he made a call. "It's him," he said to someone on the other end. "He's watching her again." Then he turned to her. "We'll end this tonight." Fear mixed with relief inside her. She didn't want confrontation, but she also knew running again would only give her husband more power. A few hours later, they heard a knock. 2 police officers stood outside. One of them spoke calmly. "We received a tip about suspicious activity near the docks. A man's been questioned. He had her old address on him." Her breath caught. It was him. The officer assured her they'd handle it legally. As they drove away, she felt her knees go weak. He steadied her gently. "It's over now," he said softly, but she knew better. The legal side would take time, and her husband's anger wouldn't fade overnight. Yet something had changed in her. She wasn't the same woman who once hid behind silence. She had people on her side now. She had courage, and she had him. That night, as they sat by the beach watching the waves, she turned to him and whispered, "How do you stay so calm?" He smiled faintly. "Because I've seen storms before, and I know they always pass." She nodded slowly, letting his words settle in. The moon cast a silver glow on the water, and the wind carried the faint scent of salt and rain. For a long time, they said nothing. They didn't need to. The fear that had once filled her heart was slowly replaced by something stronger. Trust. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. There would still be court dates, papers, memories she couldn't erase. But she knew this much: she wasn't going back. She had faced her past and survived it. And sitting beside him under the quiet night sky, she realized that maybe the wrong flight all those months ago hadn't been an accident at all. Maybe it was life giving her one last chance to be free, to be seen, and to be unafraid. The days after the confrontation with her husband felt almost surreal. She woke each morning to the sound of waves, to sunlight spilling through the curtains, and to a life that finally felt her own. The fear that had clung to her for years began to fade, replaced by a quiet strength she didn't know she had. The legal papers were filed, the restraining order was official, and she could finally walk the streets without looking over her shoulder. It wasn't just freedom, it was relief, the kind that sinks slowly into your bones and warms you from the inside. The small town welcomed her fully now. People knew her story in fragments, and they respected her. She worked at the cafe, which had grown busier than ever, and she had started to meet neighbors and other shop owners. She learned names and routines, found comfort in the simple rhythm of small-town life. For the first time in years, she felt like she belonged somewhere. He was still there, quiet but steady, like the tide that came and went without fanfare but never disappeared. They didn't speak much about what had happened with her husband. Words felt unnecessary. She knew he had been there for her, protecting her, and that was enough. Sometimes they walked along the shore in the early morning when the town was still asleep, the ocean stretching endlessly before them. Other times they sat in the cafe after closing hours, talking quietly about books, small dreams, or memories of the places they'd been. One evening, she stood on the little balcony of her room, looking at the sunset painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. He joined her quietly, handing her a cup of tea. "Beautiful, isn't it?" he said. She nodded. "It's hard to believe this is my life now. I never thought I could feel safe like this again." He looked at her, his expression soft. "You've earned this. Not just the safety, but the life you've built. You're stronger than you think." She let the words settle in, feeling them sink into her heart. For so long she had doubted herself, questioned every choice, every step she had taken to leave. Now, standing here with the sun behind her and the sound of the sea below, she realized that strength didn't come from avoiding fear. It came from moving forward despite it. The weeks passed, and her life continued to blossom. She began sketching again, something she had abandoned years ago. Her small room became filled with drawings of the sea, the cliffs, and the streets of the town. Her work at the cafe thrived, and she even began thinking about small ways she could help others in need. She wanted to give back the sense of safety and kindness that had been shown to her, and though she didn't know exactly how yet, she started planning. He remained a quiet presence in her life, though it was never intrusive. There was no pressure, no expectations, just steady support and gentle guidance when she needed it. Sometimes she would catch him watching her with a small, knowing smile, and she would wonder what he saw in her that she couldn't see herself. Other times he would simply hand her a cup of coffee, or sit beside her in silence, letting her thoughts flow freely without interruption. One day, she received a letter from the city, confirming that her husband had been served legal notices. The words were official, but to her they felt symbolic. They were proof that the past could no longer reach her. She held the letter close, feeling a mixture of triumph and relief. The life she had reclaimed was hers to keep, and no one could take it away. That night she went to the beach alone, the sand cool under her feet, and the moonlight dancing on the waves. She breathed deeply, letting the scent of salt and ocean fill her lungs. For the first time, she allowed herself to feel completely at peace. The years of fear, of hiding, of living under someone else's control, all of it seemed distant now, like a storm she had survived and left behind. When he arrived, as he often did in the evening, she didn't say anything. He simply sat beside her and they watched the waves together. There was no need for words. The silence spoke of understanding, of shared experience, and of healing. "You've changed," he said quietly after a while. She glanced at him. "I think I had to." There was no other choice, he nodded. "You've grown into someone who knows what she wants and how to protect it." "That's rare," she smiled faintly. "And you? You've been here the whole time, quietly guiding me. Don't you ever get tired of carrying other people's burdens?" He chuckled softly. "Maybe, but I think sometimes the people we help also help us. I've learned a lot from you." She looked at him, curious. "Like what?" "Like how courage can be quiet. You didn't scream, didn't fight with fists or words. You simply walked away and built your life. That's bravery." Her heart swelled with a mixture of gratitude and warmth. For so long she had felt powerless. Now she realized power wasn't about control over others. It was control over yourself, over your choices, over your future. Weeks turned into months. The cafe became more than just a workplace. It became a small community hub. She knew the regulars by name, smiled at the same people each morning, and even started helping a few newcomers find their way around town. She began volunteering for local events, small ways to give back to a town that had given her so much peace. One afternoon, while walking along the cliffs, she stumbled upon an idea that made her heart race. A small art studio, perhaps a gallery, a place where she could share her sketches, her vision of the world, and even offer workshops for other women who needed an outlet. The thought excited her, gave her purpose beyond just surviving. She knew that sharing creativity could be a way to heal others as it had healed her. He noticed the spark in her eyes. "You're thinking bigger," he said, a soft smile on his face. "I want to do something meaningful," she admitted. "Something that reminds people there's hope. That even after darkness you can find light." He nodded. "And you will. I've seen how you work. Nothing stops you now." And he was right. Nothing could stop her. Not fear, not doubt, not the shadows of her past. She had learned the hardest lesson of all. Life could be cruel and unfair, but it could also surprise you with moments of grace and kindness. As summer approached, the town buzzed with visitors and festivals. She organized a small exhibition of her sketches by the lighthouse. People came, admired her work, and asked her questions. She realized she was no longer invisible, no longer afraid of being judged. She had built something of her own, a life shaped by courage and care. He came to see the exhibition too, quietly standing at the back, watching her interact with the crowd. When she noticed him, she smiled and he gave a small nod. There was no need to speak. The pride in his eyes said it all. That evening, after the exhibition, they walked along the shore. The sky was painted with colors she could never fully name, and the moon cast a silver trail across the water. She felt a peace she had never thought possible. "You've done well," he said softly. "I couldn't have done it alone," she replied. He smiled, not saying more, letting the moment linger. She understood that some things didn't need words. Trust, gratitude, and connection were stronger in silence. The months passed and her life continued to flourish. She opened a small art studio by the water, called it Second Chances. It was simple, but it was hers. She offered classes, held small exhibitions, and invited other women to explore their creativity. Slowly, she built a community of people who were kind, gentle, and supportive, a family she had chosen. He remained a part of her life, though always quietly, always respectfully. Their connection had grown deeper, rooted not in romance but in trust, understanding, and shared experience. He was her anchor, her reminder of how far she had come. One evening, as they sat together on the cliffs overlooking the ocean, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The wrong flight, the fear, the long nights of uncertainty, it had all led to this. She had found freedom, safety, and the courage to live fully. And more than anything, she had learned that life could surprise you when you least expected it, giving you exactly what you needed, even through mistakes and detours. "I never imagined it could be like this," she said quietly. He looked at her, eyes soft. "Neither did I, but I'm glad you found your way here." She smiled, looking out at the waves, the endless horizon, and the warm lights of the town. For the first time, she felt completely at home, not just in a place but in her own life, in her own strength. The wrong plane had led her to the right life. And for the first time in years, she didn't just survive, she truly lived.